A landmark decision on gay rights from the Supreme Court. Police reform to sweep the country, and the U.S. Open is on. But will the players show up? Here's what you need to know. Good morning. This is Cheddar's Need2Know podcast for Tuesday, June 16th. I am Jill Wagner with Carlo Versano. Hey, Carlo. Good morning.
Wagner, welcome back. How was the long weekend? How was the birthday?
It was a really nice long weekend. The weather was great. The birthday was good. I mean, it was not how I necessarily thought I'd be ringing in my birthday, but you know what? It is
Hey,
what
you're
it is,
still
right? These are the
it,
times we
it,
live
it,
in.
it is what it is. And I didn't realize this, but you were born on Flag Day.
I was.
What is
Did you watch the
Flag
new
Day exactly?
Seinfeld bit by any chance? The new Seinfeld.
No.
He does a whole riff on "it is what it is." He's like, "What does that even mean?" And he's like, "When you repeat the same word in something, it's just you think you sound smart, but it's just stupid." So as I say it, I kind of realize how dumb it is. But yeah, I mean, this again, these are the times we live in. And no, I don't really know a lot about Flag Day except that I
I'm
was
super. See,
born
if
on Flag Day. President Trump also born on Flag
you,
Day.
I feel like if I was born on a holiday, I would want to know everything about that holiday. But maybe that's just me.
There's a lot of people born actually on Flag Day that I know. I think this week actually,
Yeah.
a lot of
Well,
births.
today is my sister's birthday, so HBD to my big sister Lexi. While we're on the topic.
Oh, nice. Our boss Eric, his dad actually, his birthday is Flag Day too.
Very cool.
All right, let's do this. A lot of news. And Carlo, by the way, thank you for holding down the fort yesterday. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. Of course.
Okay, tons of news. Let's start with the Supreme Court. I'm sure most people have heard by now that they issued a landmark gay rights ruling. The court ruled that the 1964 Civil Rights Act protects gay and transgender employees from discrimination at work. The majority opinion was written by one of the court's most conservative justices, Neil Gorsuch. He and Chief Justice John Roberts joined the liberal wing in the landmark 6-3 ruling, shocking Supreme Court watchers. The three dissenters were Justices Alito, Thomas, and Kavanaugh, who argued that the court was legislating from the bench, to use the turn a phrase that conservatives have often argued that liberal justices do.
Yeah, so this all has to do with a very specific phrase in Title VII of the Civil Rights Act, which stipulated that back in 1964, that employers couldn't discriminate against someone on the basis of, quote, race, religion, national origin, and sex. Right. So the question before the court was whether sex meant gender, male or female, or whether it had more of a meaning to include sexual orientation or gender identity. And as you said, they ruled 6-3 in favor of the latter. So the bottom line is you cannot be fired for being gay in America as of today.
Yeah, it reflects, I think, in some ways how the public attitudes towards the LGBTQ community have changed in such a short period of time. It's incredible.
Well, that's absolutely true, and it's we saw that with the gay marriage ruling, which was I think 5 years ago this week, and it also, to that point, Jill, it really I think reflects how out of step the president and the president's base is on this issue. Just last week on Friday, I believe, President Trump rolled back transgender medical protections, discrimination protections in hospitals and doctors' offices. That's really out of step, I think, with the majority of Americans. But I think it's I guess his base is it's something that his base is still into, or he wouldn't have done it. But the conservative argument, back to sort of like the legal aspect of this, the conservative argument against this case is essentially one of religious freedom, right? But Justice Alito, in his dissent, which I read, it's really long. I didn't read the whole thing, but I read some of it. His point is kind of, look, if you want to protect the LGBTQ folks from discrimination, that's fine, but you got to do it with a law. That's why we have Congress. Justice Kavanaugh, he wrote his own dissent that argued sort of somewhat similar thing, that there's a difference between sexual discrimination and sexual orientation discrimination. So he's really parsing what the words of the Civil Rights Act, which is sort of in line with the strict constitutionalist reputation that he has. But Gorsuch has this reputation as a textualist, right, which is essentially this idea that whatever the original text says is the law, which I guess sort of makes sense with how he ended up ruling. But definitely a major surprise that he not only ruled with the liberal wing, but authored the majority opinion.
Yeah, so he was actually appointed by President Trump, which is one of the reasons that again, we were talking about how surprising this is. One of the things, if we want to know the impact of this, according to Axios, before today's ruling, only about half of U.S. states had comprehensive laws that protect people from being fired based on their sexual orientation or gender identity. So huge impact, because in New York there's certain states where you have their protections are a bit stronger, but in others not so much.
Well, here's the thing that I don't get. I'm sorry, what were you saying?
Go on.
No, I don't want to belittle this, because it is a big deal. But anytime you're hired somewhere on an at-will employment basis, which is I think how probably most people in the country work, you don't really have any rights. Right. So, I mean, it is true that now you can't be fired for coming out to your colleagues. But if your boss wants to fire you and you're not part of a union, or you're not on a contract, they'll find a way to fire you. Right. They'll just say you don't fit in with the culture here. They don't even need to say that. Like, your employer doesn't need. If Cheddar wanted to fire me today, they would just say you're fired. Right. They wouldn't have to even give me a reason. That's all still perfectly legal. So I think that, I don't know how often it is in this day and age that people are getting like literally fired from their jobs for being gay. If your employer wants you gone, they'll find a way to get rid of you.
Well, it started, I believe that the case was brought about by somebody who had joined a gay softball league, and then he got fired from work. So there was like a direct correlation as to that,
sure,
joining the league and showing that he was gay and then being fired. I think if a company wants to fire you because your work, because you're not doing well at work or whatever it is, I think it's just causation, which is hard to prove, to your point.
Right.
Okay, let's move on now. President Trump expected to sign an executive order today about police reform, although a lot of police departments already are making significant changes in response to this protest movement. The NYPD disbanding its plainclothes anti-crime unit. Excuse me, Carlo.
Bless you.
I got another one. And this is why, by the way, we are not in the same studio. Those droplets would have gone all over you.
Droplets. Millions of viral droplets just put out there into the world.
Okay, sorry. The NYPD, again, disbanding its plainclothes anti-crime unit and reassigning about 600 officers to other duties. Albuquerque creating an entirely new public safety department designed to relieve stress on the city's police by using social workers to respond to non-violent 911 calls.
Yeah, and we also, of course,
I think we're going to see more of that.
Yeah, I hope we do. I mean, the NYPD thing, I think, is probably smoke and mirrors. They're just reassigning them within the department. I think that they're just kind of like, I don't think there's that much there. But the thing they're doing in Albuquerque is really among the more interesting reforms out there. And I think it's probably going to actually literally save people's lives. And it's always been, to me, kind of, even before this all started, I always used to think this, like, why do you have armed police responding to calls about homeless people, mentally ill people, drunk people? It just seems like it's just needlessly escalating in a lot of ways, when what you want to be doing in those situations is de-escalating or getting these people help. So I think that could be a real big thing to come out of this if more departments do that. So I mean, that's what social workers should be doing, right? The first contact with the guy sleeping on a bench, it should not be the police. It should be a psychologist or a social worker. That's my opinion, at least.
I spoke to one of the congressmen who represents Camden, New Jersey, And many years ago, they disbanded their police
Right.
and rebuilt it. They have police, right?
Yeah.
Their crime rate was through the roof, and they just needed to do something. They also found there was a lot of corruption in the police department, so they basically disbanded the police department and then rebuilt it as one of these departments that's more in line with, I think, what protesters are talking about. And one of the first
Right.
things that police did was that, they went door to door, like before you got hired, or when you got hired, you went door to door in the community, you introduced yourself. The police, sometimes they bring out, they drive around, like according to one report, like in an ice cream truck, they hold barbecues for the
Yeah.
community. And it's just this idea of saying, we're all in this together. um, I don't know about um, the unarmed, if that's how they respond to social calls. But look,
It can
I
be
mean, I
seen as
think that
that's widely
what's
seen
going
as a
on is,
huge success.
yes, and it was a big success. Crime has gone down.
Hmm.
A lot of the officers, about 100 officers who were in the police department that got disbanded, they joined the new department.
Right.
Anyway, I just really interesting ideas when you talk about police right now. Let's talk about coronavirus, though. The FDA has now revoked emergency authorization of that anti-malaria drug, chloroquine and hydrochloroquine, for use to treat COVID-19. Regulators say the drugs, which have been promoted by President Trump, he even said he was taking hydroxychloroquine at one point, are, quote, unlikely to be effective against coronavirus and come with too many risks to be used outside of clinical trials.
Yeah. Hopefully, what this does, Jill, is puts an end to the hoarding and the panic buying of this drug, which we had seen a couple months ago, so that people who actually need it, like lupus patients, can get it. Also, they're going to allow hydroxychloroquine to continue to be used in clinical trials, so this may not be the last we hear about this drug. But it definitely does mean that if you're taking this under a doctor's supervision, you should ask that doctor, you know, if he's heard this news, right?
Um, I want to mention here, a bunch of states in this country are seeing cases climb, which is definitely a little bit troubling. Um, and also, I'm watching Beijing right now, which has
Yeah.
its own outbreak. They have this new cluster originating from a wholesale market. They're at about 100 cases, if not more. And basically, they're going to take the next couple of days and figure out if they need to institute just widespread lockdowns again. But what struck me about this, and there was also another resurgence in Wuhan, where we talked about, there were 6 confirmed cases and they tested 11 million people in the matter of a couple of weeks. And it's
Yeah.
just incredible. And I'm not, look, the jury's still out, right? If who's reacting properly. But when you think about the difference of what's going on in a country like China and overseas, in terms of, they have 100 new cases. Like, we're getting 20,000 new cases in this country every single day,
Yeah.
and nearly a thousand people are still dying. And there is zero appetite for many people to shut down anymore, and businesses to shut down. And it's just really incredible when you think about the differences and how seriously they're taking it versus what feels like, everyone's kind of lost interest in it here.
It does feel that way. It does feel that way here, and I think it's certainly frustrating. And one of the things that's really sort of frustrating is when you look at the actual curves, the epidemiological curves. Most of them look globally, right? A lot of them look alike, right? You have these huge spikes, and then you have this slow, sort of like flattening. We just have this huge spike and then a plateau
Yeah.
nationally. We are not on the level of really, breaking the back of the curve, which is, it is what it is, I guess, to use your turn of
Mhm.
phrase.
So, and I'm not saying this to point a finger at anybody, because I will admit, it was my birthday this weekend and I saw a couple of friends, not many, and we hung out outside and we tried to, stay a bunch of
Sure.
feet from each other. Um, and, I said to my husband yesterday, I'm like, I- you know, are we tempting fate here? I can't believe, I was nervous. We didn't wear masks. I'm going to be honest. The thought was maybe we're going to wear masks, but we were eating and having a couple drinks. And again, we were outside and tried to stay far apart, and we didn't really hug or do anything like that, which we normally would. But
But see, to me,
like, I'm
Jill,
not. It's a real debate.
but
It's a hard
to
one.
me, that's an acceptable risk. To me, like obviously everyone makes these decisions based on their own personal circumstances and risk factors and all that. But to me, like you're not you it, this isn't we can't go on forever just being not seeing our friends and not going outside and like I think that's acceptable risk. I think what's still a non-acceptable risk is when you see people like um going to the movie theater or whatever. To me, that's just
Right.
that's tempting fate. Um, but I mean, I understand what you're saying.
No, I'm mentioning it like I feel like I don't want to come down and be like, "Nah, nah, nah, nah." I think
Yeah,
there's something real here. I think we're all sort of struggling with a little bit of fatigue of how long are we going to be locked in our
yeah.
houses and not and be talking via Zoom or Skype or whatever it is, or FaceTime. So it's just, pretty scary though. The numbers don't lie, and we haven't in New York. We've crushed the curve, and we flattened the curve,
Mhm.
and but around the country, in many places, the cases are going in the wrong direction. I do want to mention perhaps the craziest story of the day. Federal prosecutors have charged 6 former eBay employees, including 2 high-ranking executives, in a bizarre scheme in which they allegedly mailed spiders, pornography, and a bloody pig mask to try to intimidate the owners of an e-commerce blog that had been critical of their company.
I love
I
the
feel
story.
like you put this in today just to have something besides
I
coronavirus to
did.
talk about,
Well, there's almost something
or
rejuvenating,
politics.
Jill, about a story, yeah, that has nothing to do with President Trump. It has nothing to do with COVID or racism. It's just a good old fashioned story about people losing their minds and going insane. So part of this alleged scheme was to overload this couple who ran this e-commerce site with Amazon packages, just sending them stuff constantly, which I thought was kind of an odd form of harassment. But they also these eBay executives also allegedly posted ads on Craigslist announcing a block party outside these people's house. Uh, which I mean, that's like amazing. It's like something you do, like a high schooler would do. They even tailed these two people in their cars, and they had this whole plan to keep harassing these folks for months, and then have eBay come in and say like, "Hey, we notice you're being harassed. We'd like to help to sort of earn their goodwill." So they stopped writing about, badly about the company, and I mean, all because they wrote some stuff that was lightly critical of eBay, which is it's just you got to hand it to them for almost like this amazing dedication to your employer, I guess, because I just can't
I
imagine doing
I
that.
mean, look, I think that the importance of a story like this is, besides just the bizarreness of it.
Yeah.
The importance though is, does this speak to the culture in Silicon Valley?
Yes. Sure.
And
Sure.
this was one of the big criticisms that we saw with Uber back in the day when Travis
Yeah.
Kalanick was still running it, was this frat boy
Yeah.
like environment. And they did similar things where people, like journalists who had written perhaps critical articles about the company, um, they were tracking them, they were looking at
Yeah.
their rides.
That's a
Totally
really good point, Joel.
unacceptable behavior.
It's a really good point, and of course, the great irony with these stories is, like in this case, they did it because they didn't want stuff critical of eBay written, and like, okay, well, so now you have a story in which eBay just looks absolutely terrible that we're talking about. So of course, it never, uh, you know, unforeseen consequences, I suppose. But that is a good
Yeah, the
point
law
about
of
that
unintended
culture.
consequences, right?
Yeah, exactly. Right.
All right, let's talk a little sports. The biggest question in tennis has been answered. The US Open will go on as scheduled starting August 31st in New York City, but without spectators. The Open will involve special guidelines. Number one seed Novak Djokovic is called, quote, extreme.
I wonder if that means that he's gonna sit out, and if he sits out, does to Federer and Nadal sit out? I guess we'll find out. Also on the sports front, WNBA going forward with a 22-game season that will begin next month. NBA, of course, still putting a bow on their plan, which is to start their abbreviated season at the end of next month. That leaves just baseball. The MLB commissioner saying he is less confident by the day there's going to be a season at all. So we'll keep following, but it's not looking good for the baseball fans.
It's just so sad, right? I
know.
mean, there's an opportunity for some sports. Golf, meanwhile, was on this weekend, and the views, the ratings were up by 50%. So it's really, I think, short-sighted for anybody to not do everything they can to get these sports up and running safely. And I love Novak Djokovic, but I don't. Pardon me, but I'm not exactly well read on this story. What is he complaining about?
I don't really know.
Fans?
I don't know that either. I think he's complaining about I don't know if it's the social distancing or if it's like the hand washing. Let me look into that and tell you tomorrow, because I can't imagine they're doing anything that's like that crazy. Right?
No, I mean, if you said to me he felt like they weren't being safe enough, and he felt like his health was at risk, okay, fine. But
it sounds like he's
strict?
I think he's probably just looking for a reason to sit it out, I guess.
Also, the Academy Awards have been rescheduled from February 28th to April 25th of next year. It's the latest date that the award show will have ever aired. The Academy is also extending the eligibility window for films for two months, from December 31st to February 28th.
Which leaves just the Emmys, which are still on for September somehow. I'm sure they will. I'm sure that will change, but yeah, the Academy. I mean, look, this year is a wash, right? Like, I mean, maybe we'll get some of these blockbusters coming out later in the summer and the fall, but it's going to be a weird couple of years for Hollywood, just in terms of, movies are being like, it's not just the movies that are in the can that have the problems. Like, think about all the movies that were supposed to be in production right now, for intended for release in the fall, for instance, or next spring. Like, it's just going to be very weird for a while.
Weird, I think, is the understatement of the year. But yeah, it's just a weird time.
Yes, Jill, it is a weird time. What else do we have? Is that all?
It is what it is. All right.
It is what it is.
That's what you need to know for Tuesday, June 16th.
Remember, guys, we are YouTube. I'm trying to promote our YouTube page, youtube.com/Cheddar Live. If you want to watch these in living color and see Jill and I, they are on there, and you can check them out. And if you're watching them on YouTube, you can, of course, subscribe. This is a podcast, after all. You can subscribe to it on Apple or Spotify or wherever you get your pods.
Where are you today, Carlo? It's a great shot. Is it just your kitchen?
No, I'm just in my apartment. But you know what? It's because it's so sunny out. It gets so light now.
We're approaching the longest day of the year.
Yeah.
Summer solstice.
I was asleep when it was. I don't even think the sun had set when I went to bed last night. It's one of those.
Oh, wow. That's good. I'm coming off a 3-day weekend, so very different. All right, let's run. Thanks, everyone, for listening.
We will see you tomorrow.